Hello and hi. Today I will be discussing with you the last part of Lecture 6, Conserving Populations and Species, Ex Situ Conservations. So what is actually Ex Situ Conservations? Ex Situ Conservations involves taking an animal or plants out of its habitat and placing it in human care, meaning to say we take them out from its natural environment and put it into a captive environment or in captivity. These terms covers all methods such as zoos, as well as new methods like seed banks and gene banks. So ex situ conservation may not be the ideal method, but often the only answers, especially to save those species who has the status of conservation, critically endangered or at risk of extinctions, like the Sumatran rhinoceros of Sabah. The three sides to ex situ conservations, they are zoos, parks and botanical gardens, seed banks and the gene banks. The aims of zoos is to house whole animals for breeding and reintroduction program, while the secondary aim of the zoo is to educate the public, because the whole world, they have 1,100 zoos in the entire world, and they receive almost approximately 600 million visitors annually. So this is the opportunity where we can actually educate the public for free. So what is zoos all about? Whether it is the land of the living dead? Well, they are called the land of the living dead because they have several problems in the zoos, like they have a very small gene pool in which to mix their genes. So inbreeding is a serious problem in zoos. So zoos and parks try to solve this by exchanging specimens or by artificial insemination where it is possible. So in vitro fertilization and fostering by a closely related species has even been tried, like an Indian gaur, large species of cattle, and by cloned. Even if it is possible to restore a population in captivity, the natural habitat may have disappeared in the wild. So species that rely on this much help are often considered to be the living dead, meaning to say we cannot put them anywhere else beside this captive environment. If we put this kind of animal back to its own natural habitat, definitely it will die because they doesn't know how to defend themselves, how to get their food by themselves. So botanical gardens, they are estimated to be around 1,600 botanical gardens throughout the world, and these receive over 150 million visitors a year. So the Botanic Gardens Conservation Institute, the BGCI, was set up in 1987, and it is role to collect and make available information on plants conservations. So botanical garden is basically to collect and to save the plant species. So botanical gardens tend to look after plants in one of the 5 categories below. Okay, so they are not simply just take every plant in the world they can get. They have criteria or categories that they want to look at before the collection of specimens. The first categories are the rare and endangered, economically important, whether those species, if it's not rare but it has economic value, then they will collect and put it into botanical gardens, because they are very at risk of being hunted, or in the wildlife term is being hunted, but for botanical being taken out or overexploited by the economies. So species that are needed for the restoration of an ecosystem, keystone species and taxonomically isolated species. These are the 5 categories that are under consideration in terms of how these botanical gardens taking care of their species. So selecting these species is hard, and a number of factors must be taken into consideration. So there are considerations on whether which species do they need to collect. So these are the list of how they, the benchmark on how they can actually select each and individual of the species. So species at risk of extinction, suitability of plants for ex situ conservation, value of the plant, ease of collection, funds available, and chances of success. So seed banks. Seed banks allow the storage of genetic diversity of whole plant populations. Preserving the seed for use later is a long process. It involves cleaning, X-ray analysis, drying, packaging and storage, germination and monitoring. This kind of storage or seed banks is actually to help in terms of collecting all the seeds, okay, all the seeds of the plant so that it can be restored or safe because of the risk of their extinction in the wild. So the last method is gene banks. Gene banks are rather like seed banks. However, they difference from the seed banks, where the seed banks collect seeds, okay, nuts and fruits of the plants, while gene banks, they store eggs, sperms, embryos that are cryogenically frozen to protect the genetic variation of a species. So the Zoological Society of San Diego has developed a frozen zoo. So a frozen zoo is actually the gene bank. So thank you very much for listening to my lecture today. I hope you will understand. However, if you don't, you can have all these activities under this lecture, and we will have this discussion at class. So thank you very much.